So the question of how can I live the truth is always one that emerges at some point on the spiritual path and is often very much at the forefront of the seeking, of the quest for freedom, the quest for peace, the quest for abiding joy, and so on. How can I live the truth that has been glimpsed, the truth that is somehow known on the deepest level, even though I feel I may not have totally found it. Somehow in the deepest it is already known. And then there is this need to find it and finally have arrived, to find it and somehow take possession of it. It is now mine, this truth. The thing is, it's not something that can be found. It's not a thing. As long as there is this either conscious or unconscious idea that it is something to be found, there is a subject-object relationship. There's me as a human being with all its flaws and all its problems and all its wounds and all its incompleteness. And then there's this thing, truth. Maybe it's knowledge, maybe it's understanding, maybe it's some kind of experience. And if I find it, then it will make me complete. It will erase my flaws and my wounds, and I won't have to feel bad anymore. I won't have to feel unworthy. I won't have to feel not good enough, which seems to be the common denominator. So this truth becomes a thing that I must find. Subject and object. But it's not a thing. And as long as there's a subject and an object, the veil of separation continues. And it's the veil of separation that creates the many layers of obscuration to the knowing of truth and the living of truth. In other words, the return to our absolutely natural nature, innate nature, essential nature. What seems like subject and object, in some ways there's a reality to that, because there are veils of perception that obscure the actual reality, the fundamental reality that there is no subject and object. That truth is already who you are. It's already what you are. So essentially, after all the seeking, after all the I got it, I lost it, yeah? You can only get it and then lose it if it's a thing that you get, an experience, an insight, I don't know, whatever it is, a feeling, yeah? Usually a feeling of bliss, a feeling of freedom, a feeling of peace. You get it and then you lose it. Well, you can only get it and lose it if there are still veils of perception that seemingly separate subject from object. There's nothing to get and there's nothing to lose. There's only that which you already are, revealing itself more and more, more and more, in incremental stages, in gradual stages, in sudden stages, in one fell swoop, it doesn't matter. It's a revelation of the light of being, the lightness of being, the light of who you are. Why do we call it light? Because there are no veils of perception that encumber the naked openness of what we each essentially are. It's a nakedness. How is that lived? How is that known? It's lived when you meet every aspect, every situation, every experience. And here, in speaking of it, I'm dividing reality, I'm dividing experience into this situation and that situation and this circumstance and this interaction. Actually, there is no division. It's the eternal nowness of what is being experienced. But let me put it into conventional language, because it's much easier to speak that way. Yeah? When you meet everything, let's say, everything that appears in the now, in the now, in the now, in the now, nakedly. What does that mean? That means without the overlay of the narrative of the mind. We could also say the narrative of the self-identity, that always has a movement in it, a movement towards and a movement away from. We experience something which is always on a feeling level. That's how we experience, yeah? And that's why we speak of the body. I don't mean just touch, but the whole body. We feel, we taste the texture of our experience. And then we either move towards it because it's pleasant, because it's welcome, because we want to possess it, because we found it. Or we want to move away from it because it's not so pleasant. It brings up a memory of past hurt or sense of not good enoughness, and we want to shrink back from it. And this happens on subtle and not so subtle levels. This creates the ego identity. Yeah? The ego identity. The ego identity is the consistent belief-making, self-making, derived from our experience. I experience this, and everything is fantastic, and it's going my way, and I feel good, or I feel enlightened, or I feel free in this moment, or I feel at peace, or I feel joy. Therefore, the belief is created that I am good enough. I am worthy of this experience, of this love, of this freedom. I am special, I am lucky, I am blessed. Whatever, I am clever, I am successful. And then when it's not so pleasant, or it's unwelcome, or it's intense, the wave of life comes and smashes us on the rocks. There's an intensity of feeling, there's a darkness, there's a unknownness, there's a challenge. And I'm not so worthy, and I'm not so special, and I'm not so lucky, and I'm not so enlightened. Yeah? So this is the movement, of the narratives, the internal interpretation of experience. And then our attempt to interfere with that experience, if it's pleasant, if it's welcome, then I really want to hold on to it so that it never goes away. And if it's not pleasant and if it's unwelcome, then there's an attempt to control it, get rid of it, or to fix myself so that I don't have to feel this again in this way. This is the formation of ego identity. I am this and I am that. Yeah, always the polarity, the duality, the ping-pong. From one extreme to the other and everything in between. I am this and I am that. And if you listen carefully, yeah, when I say listen, I mean see, I mean sense. Yeah, look within. Look at your direct experience. You may find that this goes on in the background constantly. Maybe not so constantly, I don't know. But this constant self-creation is the formation of the ego identity. Now, there are those spiritual traditions and ideologies that say we must get rid of the ego, we must kill the ego, we must transcend the ego, we must, And then there's those who go the other way, sort of the anti-movement, which seems to be a recent thing where if anybody says anything about the ego, then they're bypassing. We can't even speak of the ego identity as something that we want to perhaps evolve through or evolve out of, because that's bypassing. So neither of these extremes are the intelligent way or the true way. That's why I say ego identity. The ego is self, is simply the sense of I. We'll come back to that, maybe. But the ego identity is that which forms itself as a psychological process, not as an entity of some kind, but a psychological process that is in constant formation through the interpretation and interference of experience. If you see that mechanism taking place, if you see that process taking place, that is more valuable than trying to find enlightenment. Because this is the possibility of the undoing of that process so that the natural light of beingness can be revealed in you and start to imbue and penetrate your life. That is enlightenment. Yeah? So you can see how that is different to trying to find it. You find it, you lose it. This cannot be lost. This cannot be lost. It can be occluded through the process, unconscious and habitual, and with millennia of practice, the human condition of interpreting and interfering with experience. I call this clear seeing. If you can clearly see this process happening in you, not just as a one-time intellectual understanding or knowledge that you gain right now. That's why I invite you not to write it down, although you're free to do so if you wish. It's not my business. But to really listen and to start seeing it in you, in your own life. That's the beginning of living the truth.